Through the Sahara, we bring on-spot news, live analysis, expert discussions on trending stories in politics, business, socio-economy, sports, and documentaries. So catch all the updates on the happenings around the globe. Stay focused on the fact today, only on ATN.
International news on Atlantic Television Network. First, the headlines. Algeria, authorities import beef for Ramadan. Saudi Arabia, officials cite crescent moon marking start of Ramadan. India, government sign agreement with Iceland. Others. Portugal, deadlock as mainstream parties wait for decisions. United States, protest vote movement spread to several states. Australia, 50 people injured in flight. And now to news in details. Algeria is importing massive amounts of beef and lamb to confront an explosion in demand for meat expected throughout the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, hoping to stabilize prices as the country's economy continues to struggle. The oil-rich North African nation is among countries working to import food and fuel, hoping to meet the requirements of Algerians preparing nightly feast as their families break their sunrise to sunset fast. For Algerians flocking to new imported meat stores staffed by butchers in White Coast, the arrival of beef from as far away as Australia has raised both excitement and skepticism. The opening of stores like this one is a breath of fresh air for those who can't afford to buy local meat. As you've seen, the product is of high quality and is so much better, retired teacher Rabah Balahone said after waiting in line at a new store for 30 minutes. By importing food products, Algeria hopes to avoid skyrocketing prices affecting those who can't afford locally sourced red meat. Such inflation plagued the country as recently as last year when the onion supply couldn't keep up with demand. Neighboring Tunisia plans to import bananas from Egypt, while Mali plans to accept donated fuel from Russia. For Algeria, the decision to import 100,000 tons of red meat this Ramadan reverses a previous policy banning the import of the product. That policy was designed to help bolster domestic producers, but has sparked pushback as the price of local meat spiked. It is the president's decision to reopen imports to permit ordinary citizens to be able to eat meat at a reasonable price and not have to put up with butchers who sell local beef, albeit of higher quality at impossible prices. Algeria's Commerce Minister Taib Zitouni said last week the import plan comes as meat prices remain high relative to the median income and minimum wage in Algeria, which has struggled to tame inflation and rising cost of living. Butchers understand that their prices present challenges for consumers nationwide, but disagree with officials like Zitouni who blame them. Local meat is expensive. It has unfortunately become a luxury product, but that isn't butchers' fault or reason to unfairly single them out, said Salim Lamari, the 40-year-old owner of a family butchery east of Algiers. He said that butchers depended on livestock farmers who had to raise their prices amid drought and spikes in the price of animal feed. The crisis led Algeria, where politicians have long been skeptical of imports, to grant new import licenses to private businesses and the state entities governing the meat industry. The country has expanded existing contracts with meat suppliers in Argentina and begun importing from Brazil, Spain, Italy, Ireland, Russia and Australia as the first week of Ramadan begins. The meat has been vacuum packed and shipped to be distributed nationwide in refrigerated vehicles. Though many have jostled to purchase meat at a fraction of the domestic price ahead of the holy month, the Ministry of Agriculture has repeatedly told local media that detractors questioning the meat's quality were peddling propaganda. A Sudanese paramilitary group battling the country's military in a nearly year-long ruinous conflict endorsed Saturday a resolution by the UN Security Council calling for a ceasefire during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. The group, known as the Rapid Support Forces, said in a statement that it hopes the resolution adopted by the UN Security Council on Friday would help deliver crucially needed humanitarian assistance to millions of Sudanese trapped in the fighting across the northeastern African country. Ramadan, during which adult Muslims are required to fast from dawn to sunset, is expected to start on or around Monday, depending on the sighting of the crescent moon. The RSF said it views the initiative as a crucial opportunity for the warring parties to embark on negotiations to find a political settlement to the conflict. We view this as a crucial opportunity to initiate earnest discussions that could catalyze a political pathway. The pathway must culminate in a durable ceasefire, foster security and stability, and result in a substantive resolution that addresses the foundational issues of the historical crisis in Sudan, it said. Sudan's military has already supported a call by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres for a Ramadan ceasefire. In his Thursday appeals, Guterres warned Thursday that the conflict threatens Sudan's unity and could ignite regional instability of dramatic proportions. Sudan plunged into chaos in April last year when long-simmering tensions between its military, led by General Abdel Fattah Burhan, said the Rapid Support Forces paramilitary commanded by Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, broke into street battles in the capital Khartoum. The fighting broke out during Ramadan last year. Fighting spread to other parts of the country, especially urban areas, but in Sudan's western Darfur region, it took on a different form with brutal attacks by the Arab-dominated Rapid Support Forces on ethnic African civilians. Thousands of people have been killed. The 15-member Security Council voted overwhelmingly in favor of the British drafted ceasefire resolution, with 14 countries in support and only Russia abstaining. The resolution expressed grave concern over the spreading violence and the catastrophic and deteriorating humanitarian situation, including crisis levels or worse of acute food insecurity, particularly in Darfur. The head of the World Food Programme, Cindy McCain, said earlier this week that the conflict risks creating the world's largest hunger crisis, with some 18 million people across Sudan facing acute hunger, including 5 million who face starvation. The conflict has uprooted more than 10 million people, either to safer areas inside Sudan or to neighboring countries, according to the UN agencies. South Sudan received 600,000 people who fled the fighting in Sudan. Officials saw the crescent moon Sunday night in Saudi Arabia, home to the holiest cities in Islam, marking the start of the holy fasting month of Ramadan for many of the world's 1.8 billion Muslims. The sacred month, which sees those observing abstain from food and water from sunrise to sunset, marks a period of religious reflection, family get-togethers, and giving across the Muslim world. Seeing the moon Sunday night means Monday is the first day of the fast. Saudi state television reported that authorities there saw the crescent moon soon after multiple Gulf Arab nations, as well as Egypt, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen, followed the announcement to confirm they as well will start fasting on Monday. North Americans Muslim also will begin their fast Monday. Leaders shared messages of congratulations the month had begun. However, there are some Asia-Pacific countries like Australia, Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore that will begin Ramadan on Tuesday. After failing to see the crescent moon, Oman, on the easternmost edge of the Arabian Peninsula, similarly announced Ramadan will begin Tuesday. Jordan will also begin Ramadan on Tuesday. This year's Ramadan comes as the Middle East remains inflamed by the Israel-Hamas war in the Gaza Strip. That has raised fears the conflict may spark unrest far beyond the current borders of the war. Saudi King Salman specifically pointed to the Israel-Hamas war in remarks released to the public after the Ramadan announcement. As it pains us that the month of Ramadan falls this year in light of the attacks our brothers in Palestine are suffering from, we stress the need for the international community to assume its responsibilities to stop these brutal crimes and provide safe humanitarian and relief corridors, the king said. U.S. President Joe Biden also recognized the beginning of the holy month, saying that Jill and I extend our best wishes and prayers to our Muslims across our country and around the world, but he also turned to the conflict in Gaza. India signed a trade agreement with Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway, and Switzerland on Sunday that includes a commitment of $100 billion in investment and creating 1 million direct jobs in India in the next 15 years. India committed to reducing import tariffs on industrial products from the 4 European countries that comprise the European Free Trade Association. The landmark agreement between India and EFTA is set to bring significant economic benefits, such as better integrated and more resilient supply chains, new opportunities for businesses and individuals on both sides, leading to increased trade and investment flows, job creation and economic growth, and the EFTA communique said. India's Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal said India, for the first time, had signed an agreement with an important economic bloc in Europe. India is also working on trade pacts with Britain and the European Union. The agreement includes trade in goods and services, investment promotion and cooperation, intellectual property, government procurement, trade and sustainable development, and dispute settlement. It will provide a window for Indian exporters to access European and global markets, Goyal said in a statement. The agreement was signed in New Delhi by Goyal, his Swiss counterpart Guy Parmelin, Iceland's Foreign Minister Jani Benediktsson, Liechtenstein's Foreign Minister Dominic Hasle, and Norway's Trade and Industry Minister Jan Christian Vestre. Parmelin, speaking on behalf of the EFTA members, said that EFTA countries gain market access to a major growth market. Our companies strive to diversify their supply chains while rendering them more resilient. India, in return, will attract more foreign investment from EFTA, which will ultimately translate into an increase in good jobs. Rescuers recovered more bodies as waters began to recede after flash floods and landslides caused by torrential rains on Indonesia's Sumatra Island, which have killed at least 26 people and left 11 missing, officials said Monday. Monsoon rains and rising rivers have submerged 9 districts and cities in West Sumatra province. Since Thursday, late Friday, a major mudslide caused the river to breach its banks and tear through mountainside villages in Pesisir Selatan district. Relief efforts have been hampered by power outages, damaged bridges, and roads blocked by thick mud and debris, the National Disaster Management Agency said. Agency spokesperson Abdul Mahari said rescuers recovered more bodies, mostly in the worst-hit villages in Pesisir Selatan and its neighboring Padang Pariaman district, bringing the death toll rose to 26. Landslides buried at least 14 houses, he said. At least 2 villagers were injured and rescuers were still searching for 11 people reportedly missing. Monsoon rains in West Sumatra province have submerged more than 37,000 houses and buildings, Mahari said. At least 3 houses were swept away by flash floods and 666 others were damaged. Floods also damaged 26 bridges, 45 mosques and 25 schools and destroyed 13 roads, 2 irrigation system units, which in turn submerged 113 hectares of rice fields and 300 square meters of plantain, the agency said. Heavy rains cause frequent landslides and flash floods in Indonesia, an archipelago nation of more than 17,000 islands, where millions of people live in mountainous areas or near floodplains. 5 cross-country skiers, including members of the same Swiss family, were found dead along a high alpine ridge after going missing over the weekend near Switzerland-famed Matterhorn. Swiss police said Monday another skier remains missing. Christian Veron, commander of Valais Regional Police, told a news conference in Sion, Switzerland, that 6 skiers set out in relatively good conditions on Saturday, but that the situation deteriorated quickly. They were on a route between the resort town of Zermatt at the foot of the Matterhorn and the village of Arola near the border with Italy. Rescue authorities had already announced a search on Sunday in difficult weather conditions. Veron said 5 of the 6 skiers were from a family from the Valais region and a 6th person who lived in Fribourg in western Switzerland. He said they were aged between 21 and 58. Without providing names or further details, he did not specify which person was still missing or indicate whether all the victims were relatives. Unfortunately, this region is accustomed to tragedies like this, he said, alluding to the deaths of 7 hikers, 6 Italians and a Bulgarian in the region in 2018. A relative of the family members alerted police on Saturday after the group didn't arrive in Arola as suspected on Saturday before nightfall. One of the skiers was able to speak by phone with the rescue squad, paving the way for their location near the Tete Blanche Ridge at roughly 3,500 meters, police said. That triggered an immediate mobilization of search teams. However, they were forced to turn around. Another search hours later had to be suspended because of poor weather conditions, including avalanche, high wind, fog, and cold, police said. Technical teams used mobile phones network to pinpoint the location of the missing mountaineers. A helicopter squad then ferried in a team, including a doctor, a police officer, and 2 rescuers, to a cabin on the Dent Blanche Peak near where they recovered the 5 bodies. Swiss prosecutors said an investigation was underway into the exact circumstances of their deaths. A search for the 6th person continues. Portugal's political future is hanging in the balance after a general election Sunday, with 2 moderate mainstream parties closely contesting the race and set to wait weeks for a decision on the winner after an unprecedented surge in support for a populist party that finished 3rd. The center-right Social Democrat-led Democratic Alliance won 79 seats in the 230-seat National Assembly, Portugal's parliament, after all votes cast in Portugal were counted. The center-left Socialist Party, in power the past 8 years ago, got 77 seats. The deciding votes will come from voters abroad to distribute the final 4 parliamentary seats after an election night full of suspense. That count could take more than 2 weeks. The hard-right Chega party came in 3rd with 48 seats, a milestone result that presented an unprecedented challenge to politics as usual, underscoring a drift to the right in the European Union. Smaller parties took the rest of the vote in an election that saw turnout rise to 66%, the highest level in Portugal for years. The moderate Social Democrats and Socialists have alternated in power for decades in Portugal, and the surge in support for a radical right party pointed to a significant shift in Portugal's political landscape and likely heralded a period of political uncertainty. A minority government that has fewer than 116 seats in parliament is at the mercy of opposition parties when it tries to pass legislation. Chega's support could hold the key to a functioning government for the Social Democrats. Chega, just 5 years old, tripled its vote from the last election. In 2022, the result positioned the party as a kingmaker that potentially could hand the Social Democrats a parliamentary majority. Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar conceded defeat Sunday as 2 constitutional amendments he supported that would have broadened the definition of family and removed language about a woman's role in the home were headed towards rejection. Varadkar, who pushed the vote to enshrine gender equality in the Constitution by removing very old-fashioned language and tried to recognize the realities of modern family life, said that voters had delivered 2 wallops to the government. Clearly we got it wrong, he said, while the old adage is that success has many fathers and failure is an orphan. I think when you lose by this kind of margin, there are a lot of people who got this wrong, and I am certainly one of them. Opponents argued that the amendments were poorly worded, and voters said they were confused with the choices that some feared would lead to unintended consequences. The referendum was viewed as part of Ireland's evolution from a conservative, overwhelmingly Roman Catholic country in which divorce and abortion were illegal to an increasingly diverse and socially liberal society. The proportion of residents who are Catholic fell from 94.9% to 1961 to 69% in 2002, according to the Central Statistics Office. The social transformation has been reflected in a series of changes to the Irish Constitution, which dates from 1937, though the country wasn't formally known as the Republic of Ireland until 1949. Irish voters legalized divorce in a 1995 referendum, backed same-sex marriage in a 2015 vote, and repealed a ban on abortion in 2018. The first question dealt with a part of the Constitution that pledges to protect the family as the primary unit of society. Voters were asked to remove a reference to marriage as the basis on which the family is founded and replace it with a clause that said families can be founded on marriage or on other durable relationships. If passed, it would have been the Constitution's 39th Amendment. You are watching the international news on Atlantic Television Network. We return after this break.
From the line across the ocean to the land beyond the mountains, through the Sahara, we bring on sport news, live analysis, expert discussions on trending stories in politics, business, socio-economy, sports, and documentaries. So catch all the updates on the happenings around the globe. Stay focused on the fact today, only on ATN. 8 a.m.
people into the country illegally. That is amazing.
Honorable
You human trafficker.
Honorable
You are a human.
They are not picking our calls. They made up their minds.
So no agreement with the EU, but
from the lines across the ocean to the land beyond the mountains, through the Sahara, we bring on-spot news, live analysis, expert discussions on trending stories in politics, business, socio-economy, sports, and documentaries. So catch all the updates on the happenings around the globe. Stay focused on the fact only on ATN.
Welcome back. This is the international news on Atlantic Television Network. Now the rest of our stories. The protest vote movement over President Joe Biden's handling of the Israel-Hamas war has spread to several states and raised more questions about whether a small but significant number of Democrats angry at Biden might abandon him in November. A week after 101,000 Michigan voters chose uncommitted on their ballot, so did roughly 263,000 voters in the 5 Super Tuesday states where similar ballot options were available. Minnesota, which had the most organized effort outside of Michigan, saw 1 in 5 Democratic voters mark the uncommitted option, a higher percentage than the 13% who voted uncommitted in Michigan. Organizers are watching the state of Washington's primary on Tuesday to see how many voters select uncommitted, and Leave It Blank campaign has formed for Georgia's Tuesday primary that is intended to have the same effect as his uninstructed vote in Wisconsin's April 2nd primary. Supporters of the protest argue anger over the war could endanger Biden's chances in swing states like Michigan against former President Donald Trump in their likely rematch. Biden's allies believe disaffected Democrats will return to the president's fold when faced with a choice between him and Trump, who the president's campaign has argued is a threat to democracy and is planning a sweeping set of policy changes that would attack liberal priorities. While the reason for voters favoring unpledged delegates over Biden may differ, the choice has been increasingly pushed as the protests vote against Biden's handling of the conflict in Gaza, where more than 30,000 people have been killed. Two-thirds of them women and children in Israel's offensive following Hamas's October 7 attack that killed 1,200 people. We wanted to show that these voters not only morally matter but politically matter as well, because if they sit out the election, which it seems like many of them might, that would have severe consequences for Biden, said Walid Shahid, a Democratic strategist who first organized the effort in Michigan. President Joe Biden said Saturday that he believes Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is hurting Israel more than helping Israel in how he is approaching its war against Hamas in Gaza. The U.S. leader expressed support for Israel's rights to pursue Hamas after the October 7 attack, but said of Netanyahu that he must pay more attention to the innocent lives being lost as a consequence of the actions taken. Biden has for months warned that Israel risks losing international support over mounting civilian casualties in Gaza. And the latest remarks in an interview with Jonathan Capehart, who pointed to the increasingly strained relationship between the two leaders. Biden said of the death toll in Gaza, "It is contrary to what Israel stands for, and I think it is a big mistake." Biden said a potential Israeli invasion of the Gaza city of Rafah, where more than 1.3 million Palestinians are sheltering, is a red line for him, but said he would not cut off weapons like the Iron Dome missile interceptors, which protects Israeli civilian populace from rocket attacks in the region. "It is a red line," he said when asked about Rafah, "but I'm never going to leave Israel. The defense of Israel is still critical, so there is no red line. I'm going to cut off all weapons so they don't have the Iron Dome to protect them." Biden said he was willing to make his case directly to the Israeli Knesset, its parliament, including by making another trip to the country. He traveled to Israel weeks after the October 7 attack. He declined to elaborate on how or whether such a trip might materialize. The U.S. leader had hoped to secure a temporary ceasefire before Ramadan begins next week, though that appears increasingly unlikely as Hamas has balked at a deal pushed by the U.S. and its allies that would have seen fighting pause for about 6 weeks, the release of additional hostages held by Hamas and Palestinian prisoners held by Israel, and a surge in humanitarian aid into Gaza. Israel remains committed to continuing its invasion and annihilating Hamas, which killed about 1,200 people in Israel and took about 250 hostages on October 7. The militant group freed dozens of hostages during a November truce, but it refuses to release more without guarantees of a complete end of hostilities. Meanwhile, more than 30,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza, according to the Hamas-run health ministry, with the majority being women and children, and hundreds of thousands going hungry. Biden noted CIA Director Bill Burns is in the region currently trying to resurrect the deal. Biden's comments came after he was captured on a hot mic following Thursday's ninth State of the Union address, telling Senator Michael Bennet DiColo that he and the Israeli leader will need to have a come-to-Jesus meeting. In the exchange, Bennet congratulated Biden on his speech and urged the president to keep pressing Netanyahu on growing humanitarian concerns in Gaza. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg were also part of the brief conversation. Biden then responds using Netanyahu's nickname, saying, "I told him, Bibi, and don't repeat this, but you and I are going to have a come-to-Jesus meeting." An aide to the president standing nearby then speaks quietly into the president's ear, appearing to alert Biden that microphones remained on as he worked the room. "I'm on a hot mic here," Biden says after being alerted. "Good, that's good." Former UN diplomat Gandio Manico Pico, whose negotiating skills have helped resolve some of the thorniest crises of the 1980s and 1990s, including the Iran-Iraq War and the kidnappings of Westerners by Hezbollah in Lebanon, has died. Pico passed away peacefully Sunday after a long illness. His son, Giacomo Pico, said he was 75. Pico worked at the United Nations from 1973 until 1992. Javier Perez, The Cellula of Peru, the fifth Secretary General of the World Body, appointed him to his executive office in 1982, and he eventually became Assistant Secretary General for Political Affairs. Pico represented Perez de Soula in negotiations between New Zealand and France after the Greenpeace flagship Rainbow Warrior was sunk by French secret agents in 1985. At the time of its sinking, the vessel was protesting French nuclear tests in the Pacific. The following year, he became the chief UN official in charge of negotiating the truce in the war between Sunni-majority Iraq and Shiite-majority Iran. More than 1 million people were killed in the conflicts that began when Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein invaded his neighbor in 1980 and featured trench warfare, waves of attacks by Iranian and chemical weapons assaults by Iraq. Pico also played a role in Afghanistan, helping facilitate the 1989 withdrawal of Soviet forces after Moscow's 1979 invasion of that country. Pico's understanding and relations with Iran allowed him to negotiate the release of hostages kidnapped by groups with the ties to the Islamic Republic, including Terry Anderson, the bureau chief in Beirut, for the Associated Press, who was held the longest in 1985 to 1991. The mission was not without risk. In 1987, Anglican Church envoy Terry Whitey disappeared from Beirut while trying to win the release of the hostages and was held captive himself also until 1991. As Bureau de Calais Special Envoy, Pico faced that risk with personal bravery and an understanding of diplomacy and the Middle East. When asked for the difference in my approach to securing the release of the hostages to that of Terry White, I responded, he went to Beirut from the west and I went to Beirut from the east. In those days, the east began in Tehran, Pico wrote in his 1999 biography. Man without a gun, one diplomat's secret struggle to free the hostages, fight terrorism and end the war. In a 2013 BBC interview, Pico described how at one point in the negotiations he traveled to Beirut, where an Iranian diplomat told him he would meet with the kidnappers that night. The car came to a screeching halt, he said, and a bag was put on his head. Then I was thrown into the boot of a car, something which I don't recommend to anybody, recalled the 6'4" Pico, known for dressing elegantly. Of course, I knew that I could be taken, he said. At that point, I had no choice. I had invested quite a bit of time, and my own belief that what I was doing was right. Pico eventually negotiated a deal in which the militias would release 10 Western hostages, including Anderson, over several months. In return, Israeli-backed forces in southern Lebanon freed dozens of Arab prisoners. Pico was born in Udine in northeastern Italy, near both Austria and the former Yugoslavia. It was a location that influenced his ability to triangulate the needs of different groups and to resolve difficult problems, according to friends and family. He was dealing with the hostage takers, the kidnappers. He was able to draw on this background, said longtime friend John Connaughton, an attorney with experience in international relations. Gianni Pico could relate to all kinds of people. Pico had political science degrees from the University of Padua and the University of California, Santa Barbara, along with the universities of Prague and Amsterdam. As importantly, his son said he was equipped with deep empathy and curiosity. He was just a curious individual. It doesn't matter who you were. He could always learn something from somebody, said Giacomo Pico, who works in finance in New York. After joining the World Body, the elder Pico became the political affairs officer of the UN peacekeeping force in Cyprus, whereas the Soula brought him to UN headquarters in New York in 1981. Different from government diplomacy, we don't try to score a political point in favor of one or another, Pico said in a 1991 interview about the UN's role. We would like to develop a situation where at the end everybody wins, and if indeed everybody wins, then we have all won. In an interview earlier this year, Anderson said Pico was selected for the hostage negotiations because I guess the Secretary General thought that if he could talk to the Afghans and the Iranians and the Russians and the Iraqis, he could talk to anybody, and he did. He broke the log. The logjam is what he did, and he did it at great risk. Anderson added he was one of the most brilliant men I ever knew. In his book, Pico described how a long-time relationship with Perez de Soula took him to Afghanistan when his mentor got the thankless Afghan brief after the December 26, 1979 Soviet invasion, helping run the U.S. Office of Special Political Affairs. De Sula asked Pico to develop a roadmap for peace in the country. The experience taught him about the role of the diplomats. Pico wrote, "Our job then was to fill the gap, nurture coalition politics in a way that would end the bloodshed," he wrote. "It is fine to emphasize the good officer role of the Secretary General, but then it is up to each of his representatives to stretch the confining rubber band as far as possible without snapping it. This is critical to understand what we did in Afghanistan." On December 12, 1991, President George Bush represented Pico with the Presidential Award for Exceptional Service. His skillful diplomacy with Middle Eastern governments and officials and representatives of the hostage holders has resulted in freedom for many individuals held in the region outside the due process of law, including 6 Americans, and including 6 Americans, said Major John Whistler, reading Pico's citation. "His personal courage in the face of danger and his dedication to the mission represent the best tradition of international civil service." In 1994, Pico left the UN to become the chief executive officer of international consulting firm GDP Associates, a regular lecturer at conferences and universities, and the author of numerous publications on foreign affairs. Pico received honorary degrees th consecutive 1 month extension of an anti-gang emergency decree. The vote by Congress late Friday means that by March 27, the country will have spent a full 2 years under the decree, which suspends some rights. Bukele has used emergency powers to round up 78,175 suspected gang members in sweeps that rights groups say are often arbitrary based on a person's appearance or where they live. The government has had to release about 7,000 people because of lack of evidence. The measure was approved Friday with 67 votes in the 84 seats Congress, where Bukele's party hold a majority. The official 30-day state of emergency, approved on March 27, 2022, following a spate of 62 killings in one day, restricts the right to gather, to be informed of rights, and have access to a lawyer. It extends to 15 days the time that someone can be held without charges. El Salvador's homicide totals have dropped from 6,656 in 2015, an average of about 18%. 18 per day to 18 so far this year. In all of 2023, there were about 214 homicides, or about 1 every 2 days. But rights groups have expressed concerns about abuses inside El Salvador's prisons and say that innocent people are being caught up in sweeps targeting the notorious violent street gangs. Gangs once controlled swaths of territory through brutality and fear. They have driven thousands to emigrate to save their own lives or the lives of their children, who are forcibly recruited. The gang's power was strongest in El Salvador's poorest neighborhoods, where the state has been long absent. They were a drain on the economy, extorting money from even the lowest earners and forcing businesses that can't or won't pay to close. Bukele run to re-election in February, making him El Salvador's first re-elected president. His party majority in Congress and a friendly court they stacked allowed him to dodge a constitutional ban. The U.S. military said Sunday that it had flown in forces to beef up security at the U.S. Embassy in Haiti and allow non-essential personnel to leave. The aircraft flew to the embassy compound, the U.S. Southern Command said, meaning that the effort involved helicopters. It was careful to point out that no Haitians were on board the military aircraft. That seemed aimed at squashing any speculation that senior government officials might be leaving as the gang attacks in Haiti worsen. The neighborhood around the embassy in the capital Port-au-Prince is largely controlled by gangs. This airlift of personnel into and out of the embassy is consistent with our standard practice for embassy security augmentation worldwide, and no Haitians were on board the military aircraft, according to the Southcom statement. In many cases, non-essential personnel can include the families of diplomats, but the embassy had already ordered departure for non-essential staff and all family members in July. The personnel ferried out of the embassy may have simply been rotating out to be refreshed by new staff. The statement Sunday said that the United States remained focused on aiding Haitian police and arranging some kind of UN-authorized security deployment. But those efforts have been unsuccessful so far. Haiti's embattled Prime Minister Ariel Henry traveled recently to Kenya to push for the UN-backed deployment of a police force from the East African country to fight the gangs. But a Kenyan court ruled in January that such a deployment would be unconstitutional. Henry, who is facing calls to resign or form a transitional council, remains unable to return home. He arrived in Puerto Rico on Tuesday after he was unable to land in the Dominican Republic, which borders Haiti. On Saturday, the office of Dominican President Luis Abinader issued a statement saying that Henry is not welcome in the Dominican Republic for safety reasons. The Dominican Republic, which shares the island of Hispaniola with Haiti, has closed its land border. Given the current situation, the presence of the Haitian Prime Minister in the Dominican Republic is not considered appropriate, according to the statement, adding that this decision reflects the firm position of the Dominican government to safeguard its national security and stability. The statement described the security situation in Haiti as totally unsustainable and said that it poses a direct threat to the safety and stability of the Dominican Republic. The statement predicted the situation could deteriorate even further if a peacekeeping force is not implemented urgently to restore order. Caribbean leaders have called for an emergency meeting Monday in Jamaica on what they called Haiti's dire situation. They have invited the United States, France, Canada, the United Nations and Brazil to the meeting. Members of the CARICOM regional trade bloc have been trying for months to get political actors in Haiti to agree to form an umbrella transitional unity government. At least 50 people were injured Monday by what officials described as a strong movement on a Chilean plane traveling from Sydney to Auckland, New Zealand. LATAM Airlines said in a statement that there was a technical event during the flight which caused a strong movement. It did not elaborate on what happened. Passengers were met by paramedics and more than 10 emergency vehicles when the flight touched down Auckland. About 50 people were treated at the scene for mostly mild injuries, with 13 taken to a hospital, an ambulance spokesperson said. One patient was believed to be in a serious condition. Passengers said a number of people were not wearing seatbelts when flight LA 800 suddenly dropped. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner landed at Auckland Airport as scheduled and was due to continue on to Santiago, Chile. LATAM regrets the inconvenience and injury the situation may have caused its passengers and reiterates its commitment to safety as a priority within the frameworks of its operational standards, the airline said. And that's the international news for today. Before we go, another look at the major stories. Algeria, authorities import beef for Ramadan. Saudi Arabia, officials cite crescent moon marking start of Ramadan. India, government signs agreement with Iceland. Others. Portugal, deadlock as mainstream parties wait for a decision. United States, protest votes movement spread to several states. Australia, 50 people injured in flight. I am Valentina Lawrence. Thank you for watching. You can follow us on all our social media platforms: on X, Atlantic TV Net, Facebook and YouTube, Atlantic Television Network, Instagram, Atlantic TV Network, or you can watch us live on our website, atlanticnetwork.tv. Do remember that peace and unity are the pathways to progress. Thank you. Have a lovely afternoon.